Hi, it's Dwyer. It is July 23rd, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. I'm just going to talk about a couple of topics. First, Bob Arum's take on Canelo against Crawford. I think it's important. And next, who would give Usyk a hard time if Usyk, now in his very late 30s, continues boxing? Let's talk about Bob Arum. Now, understand, Bob Arum was involved in a lawsuit with Terence Crawford. Right, Bob Arum is still active with Top Rank, which is still recruiting fighters. Right, it's possible that Bob Arum might have a motive in his statements. He might be trying to gloss over past differences with Crawford. He might be trying to placate some major Bob Arum Top Rank fighters. Richard Torres, for example, is a friend of Terence Crawford's. Maybe he wants to be able to recruit future boxers from Nebraska, fighters who look up to Terence Crawford, other fighters. Who knows what his motivation is? But he made a statement, and for the record, I think Canelo wins the fight. But Bob Arum's been in the game a lot longer than I've been on Earth, right? And just understand, Arum, who's a Harvard Law School graduate, understand, Arum is a very distinguished guy, gave the following quote. It's in a Seconds Out article. I encourage people to track down this article and to read the interview. His quote is, "I think Crawford will win a wide decision. It'll either be a knockout or a wide decision. More likely a wide decision because Canelo is going to go into a shell. People don't realize how far back Canelo has gone. It just wasn't the last fight, my words, with William Skull. Right? Back to Arum. But the fights before that. Right, now let me make a few points here. Crawford naturally is a left-hander. I don't think Crawford can beat Canelo inside the pocket. I haven't seen Canelo go into a shell in any fight he's had. I'll concede. The Arislandi-Lara fight, Lara southpaw, he could have lost that. The judges could have awarded Lara that fight. Lara on his back foot, as I expect Crawford to be. The William Skull fight, folks, that fight could have been scored differently. That fight, in my eyes, could have gone either way. And, of course, the Dimitri Bivol fight, which actually did go against Canelo. But let me point out the Bivol fight. I want you to look at the very end of that fight. Bivol is a light-skinned guy, right? You'll notice Bivol has discoloration on his arms at the end of that fight. In other words, he was getting hit with some shots. Now, he won the fight, right? Truth be told, I thought he would win the fight. Go back and look at the online videos. And Bivol's defensively blessed, right? He's blocking shots with his arms. He's wearing body armor. It's not all reflexes. But at the same time, the shots he was blocking were hard shots. And understand, Bivol was a 175er. Right? Bivol was a bigger man than Canelo. Let me also say, too, the Pacquiao-Mario Barrios fight. By the way, there's an interview of Tim Bradley online where Bradley, has no problem with the draw. If he had to pick a side, he would pick Barrios in the fight. Folks, I'm just telling you from my seat, and I had money on Pacquiao. From my seat, that's not the kind of fight on which a title should change hands. Right? I believe you really have to beat the champ in such a way that most people believe that you deserve the title. It can't be a photo finish. Right? You can't have people like Timothy Bradley out there saying, hey, I thought Barrios won it, but I like the fact that they called it a draw. You can't have 90% of the people who believe Manny Pacquiao won the fight start their comments by saying it was close. Right? If it's close, then the belt should stay where it is. Now, just realize, Mario Barrios is not undisputed at 147 pounds. Canelo is undisputed at 168 pounds. Talk about the advantages an incumbent has. Right here, understand. If I'm going to take 4 titles from Canelo, you're going to have to either win by a wide margin or knock him down, stagger him a few times, make it clear that it's not his night, that your blueprint works. Now, Crawford faced Victor Postal in a unification match. I believe that's the fight style he's going to use. That's Crawford on his back foot, dancing around the ring, moving. Postal, better than advertised. Postal's trainer for that fight, Freddie Roach. And Crawford was able to knock Postal down twice in that fight. Right? So Crawford wasn't just on the move, he was on the move with power. Right? Folks, understand Crawford and Postal were the same weight class before that fight. Here, he's in against Canelo, a guy who's accustomed to being hit at 168 and 175. Right? Let's remember, Bivol is just one of the guys Canelo fought at 175. He also fought Kovalev. You might recall Kovalev beating Anthony Yard. Right? Depending on how you see the lay of the land, you might even think Kovalev beat Andre Ward the first fight. Right? So, just understand, Canelo hasn't been knocked down. And he's faced the bigger punchers. And if there's any champ who you have to beat by a wide margin, it's going to be one who's undisputed. Right? I can't slip in the back door to beat an undisputed champion. Right? It has to be clear to everyone what I've accomplished. I believe Crawford is going to try to do that on his back foot. As I mentioned earlier too, we saw Canelo against a guy who, by the way, like Crawford, looked Canelo's size. In fact, looked bigger than Canelo. Jermell Charlo. And of course, Charlo tried to win that fight on his back foot, and Canelo was active early. Look at the film. Canelo's hunting him down. Canelo's backing him up. Even the knockdown happens with Charlo by the ropes. Right? Charlo was on the move. Let me say this too. Ray Leonard, hard puncher. Right? For his weight, a blessed puncher. Right? He was asked his thoughts on Crawford Canelo, and he pointed out that when he fought Donnie Lalonde, right, light heavyweight champion, I believe there was a catch weight involved in that fight. Double check me on that. But when he fought Donnie Lalonde, Leonard talked about how Lalonde's power was heavy. Right? Leonard, by the way, gets knocked down in that fight. That fight is one of Ray Leonard's best fights. He gets off the canvas. That's Ray in a bad mood. And then he turns on the hand speed and outguns Lalonde. But understand, Ray talked about how the heaviness of the punches bothered him. Right? That's what happens when you jump up in weight. And let's be clear, Ray was fighting at welterweight. That's where he fought Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Right? He moved up to 160 eventually. That's where he fought Marvin Hagler. Then he jumped up to light heavy, in quotes, catch weight to fight Donnie Lalonde. Right, folks? That last jump hurt him. He ended up getting dropped. He gets off the canvas. He wins the fight by stoppage. One of Ray's dramatic knockouts. Just understand, here, Crawford would be up against it if Canelo knocks him down. Right? Just, the odds of Crawford getting off the canvas to drop Canelo, I think they're slim. We'll find out together. Now let's talk about Usyk. Let me say this, and it's going to be controversial. Right? Don't make the mistake of believing too much in the rankings. That's not what determines the outcome of fights. Right? The styles make fights, not the rankings. Right? So, Usyk. Let me just say, the disappointing thing for me, and I was disappointed by this, but I understand it was the second knockdown in the fight, was the fact that Dubois was so dazed and confused at the end of this fight that he let a southpaw load up on what Usyk calls his Ivan punch. Right? A chopping left hand. Right? A blend between a cross and a hook. In other words, Usyk was able to land his plan A against Daniel Dubois. I would have preferred if Dubois got dropped off an Usyk right hand, or if Usyk was forced to throw an uppercut that drops him. Okay, show us some different angle where fans could look at the fight and say, you know what, Dubois was actually stopping him from his plan A. Usyk had to dig deep to use his offhand or to use a punch we don't see him throw that often to win this fight. No, that's not the way it was. Right? Usyk, of course. Now, granted, Dubois had been down on the canvas. Maybe he got up. Maybe he was confused. Defense will fall apart when you're, struggling to stay upright. But just understand, if in the abstract you said, what's the punch you need to stop Usyk from throwing other than his jab? I would say it's this chopping right hand. Chopping left hand from a southpaw. Right? His dominant hand. And understand, that's what landed flush on Dubois. So let's talk about who I think beats Alexander Usyk. I don't believe, even after this knockdown, that Usyk is a big puncher. I think Usyk is a clever mover, right, who keeps fighters guessing on which direction he's going to go. I think Usyk has a pretty good jab. I think Usyk knows how to play defense. In other words, he's moving. He knows when you're out of position to hit him with certain shots. And of course, he controls tempo in his fights. Right? But I don't see how he would stop a George Foreman from coming forward throwing power shots. I just don't. Right? Let me say too, he really benefits from being the incumbent. The first Fury fight, just understand he wasn't the incumbent then. Because Fury, who was unbeaten at the time, who had beaten Vladimir Klitschko, right, a long-standing heavyweight champion, to get the title, right? This was when Klitschko was active. This was when Klitschko was the title holder. Neither of which was true when Klitschko lost later to Anthony Joshua. Right? Fury had beaten Klitschko. Fury, of course, had a series of fights with Deontay Wilder. Fury, that first fight, you viewed him as the legitimate champ, even though Fury had had his own near car crashes, right? The Francis Ngannou knockdown wasn't good for publicity. But Fury, had stopped Wilder. He had stopped Dillian White. He had stopped Derek Chisora. Fury had done a number on some decent heavyweights. Right, by the way, Chisora still, probably the Brit who gave Usyk the best fight. Right, Fury is winning the early part of his fight against Usyk, but you never got the feeling Usyk was overwhelmed. You got that feeling in the Chisora fight, right? Usyk has his back up against the ropes during that fight. So let me just say, now that Usyk is the champion, folks, if you don't hit and hurt, stagger, or drop a mover, a guy who's active, a guy who's going to have thrown a lot of punches on the CompuBox, right? A guy whose game is to make you miss. It's to outwork you. It's to throw flurries when your defense isn't quite set because you've been forced to move your feet. Right? Just understand, now that Usyk is the incumbent, right? A slugger with slow feet really has to stagger him, hurt him, give us a reason to believe the title should change hands. If it's a fight that just goes to decision, with Usyk giving as good as he gets, given Usyk's volume, given Usyk's movement, if Usyk isn't pinned on the ropes, if Usyk gets to move around the ring as he pleases, you're not going to beat him. Right? The second Fury fight. And I know Fury's upset with it. Right? But folks, Usyk wins that fight by at least a couple of rounds. Right? You're not at the end of that fight thinking, wow, I wonder who won this fight. No, you thought Usyk entered the ring the champion, the winner of the first fight, and Fury never lands the kind of home run shots that have Usyk holding on, that have Usyk slowing down. In fact, Usyk finishes that second fight well. Right? So understand, I believe to beat him, you need a slugger who is going to be aggressive, not cautious, like Dubois was this last fight. Right? There are times in this fight where you understood Dubois' only chance of winning the fight was by stoppage, but yet he makes a boxing match break out. Right, they're in the ring, they're hanging out, they're boxing with each other. You're thinking, wow, doesn't Dubois realize that this is playing into the champion's hands? That this is Usyk's game. Right, Usyk, the reigning champion, would feel good having a fight go to a decision against Daniel Dubois, who, let's do the math, doesn't really have a lot of experience in rounds 11 and 12, does he? Right? So I believe a front foot, aggressive heavyweight who's going to throw big shots. That's who Foreman is. Or a front foot heavyweight, heavy-handed heavyweight, knockout artist who's going to find Usyk, who's going to force Usyk to get sloppy, who's going to run over to Usyk and throw a lot of shots, hit Usyk in the body, not give Usyk the opportunity to dance away. A heavyweight with foot speed, whatever his ranking, I believe would give Usyk a hard time. Also a daredevil heavyweight, right? I believe Martin Bakole, for example, who sparred with Usyk, would give him a hard time, because I believe Bakole would understand, look, I need to be front foot heavy here. I need to create the action. I don't want a boxing match. No one's going to give me a decision. I need to be throwing he's a rare long-range hooker. I need to be throwing a lot of power shots from long range. I need to go find this guy. If he moves away from me, fine. I'm going to chase him. But more importantly, there's some young guys who I feel give Usyk all he can handle. Now, I'm not going to include a guy who I'm still trying to figure out. Moses Atama. Right? Because Atama doesn't run over to you. This is not the front foot heavy guy who I think would give Usyk a hard time, right? I need a Chisora type where round one starts, nobody has to convince Derek Chisora that he needs to create the action. No one has to convince Derek Chisora that he should try his best to pin Usyk up against the ropes. He just knows. Moses Atama, he's an advanced fighter. I believe he has top-end hand speed. But understand, his real game is to change speeds on you. Right? His real game is to come over. He's a southpaw. He has you trying to figure out the angles. He's hiding his hands. Then he slowly opens up, and then you realize there's more to the puzzle than it initially seemed. Right? No, I'm talking about hyper-aggressive fighters who are just going to come across the ring and say, player, let's have a shootout. I'll be your Huckleberry. Here I am. Alexander, what are you going to do with all this? Right now, before I go further, because I'm going to name some guys who are off the grid. Before I go further, let me just say, I want Usyk's next fight to be Joe Parker. I think Parker is the kind of cagey vet who has ring coverage, who has foot speed, who quietly for years has been one of the heavyweights division's best athletes. Right? One of the problems with Tyson Fury is he's no longer the level of athlete that he used to be. Joe Parker strikes me as being in better shape. I think Joe Parker understands he can't be bashful against Usyk. Parker also has power. We saw that in the Martin Bakole fight. right? So Parker, in my opinion, would be perfect in terms of coming after Usyk, understanding he needs to throw power shots. Let me say, too, Parker gets off the canvas twice against Zhilei Zhang, a southpaw, right? Like Usyk. Let me just say, too, Zhilei Zhang, I believe, would give Usyk all he can handle as well, because Zhang is a crafty southpaw, right? He would understand he has to stalk Usyk. The question is, there are questions about Zhang's stamina. Usyk, of course, is great in terms of stamina. I personally don't expect Usyk to be able to go to Zhang's body like another guy I think who would give Usyk a lot of problems, Ajit Kabayal, did. Right? So what you would have is Zhang throwing a lot of power shots. That's what he does. You know, trying to walk down Usyk. You would have Usyk moving away. Zhang two-handed. Right? This is the poker player who's masquerading as a simple slugger. Right? I think Zhang would give him a hard time. I think Joe Parker. I think Ajit Kabayel. But let's throw in some wild cards. Folks, in terms of aggressive front foot in the heavyweight division, you're not going to find a more aggressive front foot than Richard Torres. Right? You're simply not. Torres, unbeaten, 11 KOs in 13 matches. Torres would come across the ring and force a fight. Right? We don't know how Usyk would do against a young guy, not an older Derek Chisora, but a young guy who's prepared to grapple with him, throw heavier volume than Derek Chisora, right? Force him to wrestle a bit. I think Torres would give him a hard time. Now let's talk about a longer shot. I thought this guy would lose, and he did, to Martin Bakole. He wasn't quite ready for Bakole, who, you know, is prepared to have shootouts. Right? But understand, big baby Jared Anderson is one of the best athletes in the heavyweight division. Right now, he's been matched against fighters who, you know, haven't moved, haven't created the kind of dynamic that an Usyk would create. Right? Murray, he's been fighting a lot of negative energy guys. Right? Just like Manny Pacquiao didn't look good against Ugas. Right? Because Ugas was prepared for Pacquiao jumping in the pocket. Right? Ugas understood when Pacquiao jumped in the pocket, that's a countering opportunity. He was prepared to counter Manny Pacquiao. Now, truth be told, Big Baby, who by the way is ambidextrous, people need to figure that out. Right? Big Baby, not defensively blessed, can't pace himself. Right? He's a guy who'll throw too many punches in a round. There is a question on whether he'd be able to pace himself to still hang with Usyk in the later rounds. But you and I know Usyk's not going to come in and hit him to the body a few times like Martin Bakole did. Right? You and I know, you know, if Big Baby comes in the pocket and is throwing Big Baby's volume, Usyk's going to move. Usyk's going to circle him. He's not going to stay there. Let Big Baby land some shots so he can land his big shots, which is what Bakole did. I think you need a young athlete like Big Baby, and I recognize there are a number of heavyweights ranked above him. But Usyk's in his late 30s, right? You need the athlete who is young, is headstrong, believes he can trade with Alexander Usyk, who's going to jump on Usyk and who's going to be throwing heavy artillery that, if it lands, is going to hurt him. Right? So let me say, I know fighters fall out of favor. Big Baby has what, one loss? Right? I'm surprised with all that's happening at 154. I mentioned in an earlier video Keith Thurman, and people were laughing, saying, no one's avoiding Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman's only losses to who? Manny Pacquiao? I mean, you don't think Keith Thurman would be competitive against Tim Tszyu and some of the others? You're kidding yourself. Right? And so, let me just say, Big Baby, one loss. If you're on that side of the ledger, you're probably going to get spectacular odds. Because Big Baby has a problem with pacing. Right? And because Big Baby's not defensively blessed. You can be on both sides of the play because Big Baby probably would be getting what? 4-1, 5-1 odds simply to win. The other side of the bet would probably be Usyk by stoppage. Right? Because Usyk is a guy who, if you overextend yourself, he makes you pay. You have to be measured. So let me just say, I'm not expecting Usyk to hang around boxing much longer. I don't think this is a Manny Pacquiao story. I think Usyk has one, maybe two fights left. Right? I think if he wants to fight the most deserving, I believe that's Joe Parker. Why? Because Parker beat Zhilei Zhang, the best opponent, in my opinion, who Ajit Kabayal has beaten. Right? And Joe Parker has also beaten Martin Bakole and Deontay Wilder. Right? I think Joe Parker is the most deserving. If there's a pivot toward Ajit Kabayal, I'm not going to object. That's a tough opponent. Outside those two, right? Zhilei Zhang, to me, southpaw. Boxers haven't figured out yet that you have a country that is a gambling country with one of the gambling meccas in the world, Macau. You have something like 1.4 billion people. Right? Let's be real here too. Folks, most of the AI patents in the world are owned by the Chinese. just food for thought. China has much more nuclear power than the United States right now. Right? I'm a bit surprised if Usyk wanted a money grab. Right? And it'd be hard-earned money because I think Zhang is dangerous. I'm surprised that the powers that be can't get together and figure out a way to make this a big event in China. Right? I'm not sure if I understand why no one has said, hey, let me fight Zhilei Zhang in China. Right, folks? That's a blockbuster. Understand, Zhang is a southpaw. Right? Zhang's not going to be bashful. Usyk doesn't have the to-the-body game that Ajit Kabayal has. Right? And, of course, the Richard Torres fight. Folks, you're talking about a young gun, a former Olympian. I believe he won the silver. Right? A young gun who is too young to show up in the ring and defer to an old master. He's going to push it. Right? He's going to force some kind of outcome. I don't think Usyk can go punch for punch with him. right? Usyk hasn't even been forced to clinch a lot in fights. Has anyone noticed that? He's moving. The other guy seems out of shape. The other guy can't get close enough to him. The other guy starts falling apart. By the time you get to the 5th round, Usyk has won at least 3 of the first 4. And, of course, he's the person who most of the public considers the rightful heavyweight champ. Of course, now he's undisputed. So there's no dispute about that. Right, folks? Richard Torres, and I'm not saying Torres is perfect. Torres has had some tough fights. I thought that Canelo fight was difficult. I thought Canelo came back in that fight. Right? But what I know is Torres is not going to leave doubts about his effort, about his desire to take the title by stoppage. Right? Torres is not going to waste a lot of time trying to outbox Alexander Usyk. Styles make fights, not rankings. Right? The toughest guys against Usyk might be guys who, like Jared Anderson, have a loss on the record. Right? I think Anderson has the kind of athleticism, particularly if he's in a fight against a guy who's going to be doing a lot of athletic things against him. Right? I think Big Baby in that situation would try to raise room temperature. He tried against Bakole. It cost him. Right? Just understand, he's hit with uppercuts and weird punches in that fight. I give Bakole credit. Right? I just don't see that in Usyk's arsenal. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.